Are your ad campaigns lighting up the dashboard, but not the pipeline? That's bullspend, and marketers are calling it out in Dashboard Confessions.
My boss asked for results, so I opened my dashboard for the only positive-sounding metric I had: impressions.
Cut the bull spend. See revenue, not just reach. LinkedIn delivers the highest return on ad spend of major ad networks. Advertise on LinkedIn. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a $250 credit. Go to linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Expedia and Visit Scotland invite you to come experience the beauty that awaits in Scotland. The sweep of wild coastlines, quiet lochs, and untamed landscapes. Fresh cuisine that feels rooted in the land. Come experience the kind of stillness that stays with you long after you leave. Plan your Scottish escape today at expedia.com/Visit Scotland.
You're listening to Unbound presents Until They Wake. 7 episodes, 6 lives, 1 impossible convergence. Beth Curry's been chasing these stories for a while now, and she's finally ready to share what she found. It's not what you'd expect. Nothing about this is. Pull up a chair. This one's different.
Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Beth Curry, and you're listening to Until They Wake. We're halfway through. 3 stories down, 3 to go. They're all tied together. And I'm going to kind of share that in a few days because it's pretty wild. Today I'm taking you back further than the others. 1976. This was before personal computers and cell phones and the internet. Back to a time, if you wanted to build something, you did it with your own damn hands and basic tools and a whole lot of skill, right? This is a story of Danny Walsh. He was a construction worker from Queens who believed in honest work and doing things right the first time. And what happened to him in 1976 was the kind of accident that doesn't leave many survivors. Kind of one of those freak accidents, right? He started learning construction in his grandfather's garage when he was 8. It was a cramped space in Queens that smelled like sawdust and motor oil. It was filled with tools Danny didn't know the names of. His grandfather would hand him nails and show him how to hold a hammer and kind of let him mess up and try again. And he had that one rule that everyone else has: measure twice, cut once. By 12, Danny could frame a doorway. And by 15, he was helping with small reno jobs around the neighborhood. And by 18, he had his contractor's license and a beat-up pickup truck with Walsh & Son Construction painted on the side. His grandfather died when Danny was 23. He had a heart attack. It was sudden. You don't really have time to say goodbye there. He left Danny the business, a truck, some tools, a reputation for honest work in a neighborhood where that actually meant something, right? So 1976, Danny was 25. And the city was different than it had been when he was a kid. It was dirtier. It was more dangerous. It was falling apart at the seams, New York in the 70s was rough. People romanticize it now, but mostly it was just hard. There was work, if you knew where to look, though. Buildings that needed fixing. Danny was good with his hands, of course, good at solving problems and showing up on time and doing what he said he'd do, and that was worth something. So he lived in a studio in Astoria, the 3rd floor, walk up, rent controlled. The kitchen was barely big enough to turn around in, but Danny wasn't home enough to care. Most nights he would grab dinner at the diner on the corner. The waitress Marie knew his order before he sat down and would bring him coffee without being asked. Danny wasn't much for talking. He never had been. His grandpa used to joke that Danny said more with a hammer than most people said with their mouths. His mom called every Sunday from the house in Brooklyn where he grew up, asking if he was eating right and if he was meeting anyone. He was 25. He told her he had plenty of time for all that, right? Right now he was focused on the business and on proving he could do the thing his grandfather started. The work kept him busy, small jobs mostly, fixing porches, replacing roofs, renovating kitchens and houses older than he was. He liked the rhythm of it. He really did. The physicality, the way a problem had a solution, the way you could see exactly what you'd accomplished at the end of the day. In August of 1976, he got brought onto a bigger project. This was a hospital renovation out in Jersey, Springfield General. They were adding a new wing, modernizing the basement level, and updating all the mechanical systems. It was union work, good money, the kind of job that would lead to bigger things. Danny was on the concrete crew, pouring foundations and building forms and laying rebar. It was hot, brutal work in the summer heat. They would start at 6 a.m. They would try to get as much done as possible before the worst of the afternoon sun. The foreman was a man everyone called Big Mike. He was old school. He kind of ran a tight ship. He didn't really tolerate shortcuts. No problem for Danny. He used to remind the crew that they were building a hospital, that people's lives would depend on what they did. So they did it right, and Danny respected that. Most of the crew were older guys who'd been doing this their whole lives, and they gave Danny grief for being young and called him a kid, even though he had his own business. But they also taught him things, how to read concrete as it sets and how to know when a form isn't quite right and how to work smarter instead of just harder. Danny learned fast. He always had. There was a nurse who came down sometimes during their lunch break. Young, dark hair, pulled back, always carrying paper cups of cold water when it was really hot. She'd warn them when they were being too loud for the patients upstairs. She told them they were doing great work. Her name was Linda. Danny managed to say 2 words to her, and then he would stand there feeling like an idiot while the older guys gave him a hard time about it. But he thought about her more than he should. He practiced conversations in his head he'd never actually have. The renovation was supposed to finish by October. They were rushing and working longer hours, 6 days a week sometimes. Danny didn't mind. The overtime was good. He liked being part of something bigger than fixing a porch. His grandfather would have been proud. September 22nd, 1976, a Wednesday. They were working on the lower level, the deepest part of the basement where they were installing new mechanical systems, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, all the guts of a modern hospital being threaded through a building that was 70 years old at this point. Danny's job that day was helping pour concrete for a support column. 10 feet tall, 2 feet in diameter, he says. Structural steel rebar running through the center. He was on form duty. His partner, Ray, was a man in his 50s who'd been doing concrete work since before Danny was born. Ray told him to keep it steady, any wobble, and the whole thing was ruined. The concrete would come down the chute, thick and heavy, gray and wet, smelling like minerals and chemicals. Danny braced against it. His muscles were straining, his feet planted wide on the temporary platform they'd built. Everything was going fine. The form was holding, the concrete was flowing smooth. They were actually ahead of schedule at this point. But that's when Danny heard it. A crack. It was sharp and sudden, like a tree branch breaking. Platform gave way, of course. 1 second he was standing on solid wood. The next he was falling, 10 feet straight down, his back catching the edge of the steel rebar on the way. Pain, instant and complete. He said he felt like his spine had exploded. He hit the concrete floor and couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't feel his legs. There was shouting. There was someone screaming for help. Big Mike's voice was louder than Danny had ever heard it. "Don't move him. Don't move him." Danny wanted to say he couldn't move even if he wanted to, but his voice wasn't working either. Nothing was working except the pain, which was everywhere. Linda appeared above him. Her face was pale, but she was completely professional. She asked if he could hear her. He managed something that might have been a nod. She told him to try not to move, that help was coming, and to just stay with her. More people showed up, a stretcher. There was this agonizing process of moving him without shifting his spine. Like every tiny adjustment sent lightning through his body. Linda went up with him on the stretcher. He could hear her voice through everything, steady and calm, telling him to keep his eyes open. He says he tried. Once up in the ER, they did x-rays and tests, and a series of doctors with serious faces spoke to him in medical language. It sounded like foreign language to him. His mom arrived at some point, and the look on her face when she saw him was something Danny would never forget. He says it was like terror and grief and love all at once. They wheeled him into surgery. The last thing he remembered before anesthesia was Linda squeezing his hand. When Danny woke up, the doctor said it was a miracle. The fall should have done far worse, but somehow, by millimeters, by luck, by whatever force decides these things, the damage was manageable. Surgery was successful, and with physical therapy and time, he would probably walk again. Danny didn't feel lucky. He felt like he'd been hit by a truck, but he could wiggle his toes, and that counted for something, he said. Linda visited him every day during her shifts. She brought him magazines he didn't read, told him stories about the other patients, and made him laugh, even when it hurt to laugh. 6 weeks in the hospital, 3 months of physical therapy, slow, painful progress from bed to wheelchair to walker to cane to nothing. By January, Danny was back at work. He married Linda in 1978. It was a small wedding, just family and a few close friends. She wore a simple white dress, and he wore the only suit he owned. His back hurt standing at the altar, and he didn't care. He was so happy, he says. The woman had stayed with him through the worst stretch of his life, and that meant so much to him. They moved to a bigger apartment in Astoria. It was 2 bedrooms, enough space to start thinking about kids. Linda kept nursing, and Danny kept building, and they found their rhythm. Their daughter, Katie, was born in 1980. She had dark hair like Mom, and she fit perfectly in Danny's rough, calloused hands. Being a father changed something in him. It made him more careful on job sites. He had someone to come home to now. Two someones, actually. He taught Katie to use tools when she was barely old enough to hold them. He told her the same thing his grandfather told him, measure twice, cut once. She'd nod like she completely understood. The business grew slowly. Walsh and Son became Walsh and Daughter, though Katie rolled her eyes at that when she got older. Danny hired a couple of guys and took on bigger jobs. Nothing fancy, but steady work that always paid the bills and then some. His back never fully healed, he said. Some days it was a dull ache and other days he could barely move. Linda would make him lie down with a heating pad and tell him he was getting too old for this work. He'd ask what he was supposed to do. It's all he ever knew. She'd say he could teach and pass on what he knew, and maybe someday he'd tell her, but not yet. Katie went off to college. She was the first person in Danny's family, actually, to go off to college. She studied architecture at Pratt. Called him every Sunday, just like he used to call his mother, or she called him. She was learning to design the things that he'd spent his life building. That felt like some sort of legacy to him. Linda's dad got sick in 2010. Cancer. It was aggressive. He lived out in Jersey, the same town as that hospital where Danny had fallen all those years ago. They visited every weekend that summer and fall and watched him get smaller and frailer and less himself, and he died in November of 2010. After the service and after the burial, after everyone had gone home, Linda said she wanted to visit the hospital. She wanted to see where she used to work and where they'd met. Springfield had changed over the decades. There were new wings now and new technology and new everything, but the bones of it were the same, and Danny could see traces of the work they'd done in 1976. The foundation he'd helped pour and the columns he built. Linda stood in what was now a storage area and said this was where she found him, right here. She was so scared that day, and Danny told her he'd be okay and then they'd both be okay. And she leaned into him and said, yeah, they'd been lucky. Katie called that evening. Danny told her they were holding up, that Mom was tired. Been a long day. After they hung up, Linda said she was going to go to bed. She was pretty exhausted from everything. Danny told her he'd be up in a bit. Just wanted to walk around and stretch his back. The hotel was connected to the hospital by an enclosed walkway. Danny found himself moving through it without really trying or really deciding to. He was just kind of following old memories down corridors that had been renovated beyond recognition. And he found a stairwell, and he followed it down past the main level and past what used to be the first basement, down towards where they'd worked all those years ago. It was colder down there. When he did this, it was quieter. He said it was like the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing. You could almost see your breath. He walked past mechanical rooms and storage areas, not really looking for anything, just moving. His back was starting to ache, the old injury flaring up in the cold and damp. He says he should have turned back at that point, just gone back to the hotel and taken some aspirin, but he took a few more turns and realized he had lost track of where the stairwell was. He told himself he'd just find another way back up, because, again, a big building, it's easy to get turned around. He found a corridor that led to an exit, and he pushed through the doors and stepped out into the cold night air, and he walked back to the hotel from the ground level instead of through that tunnel and went to bed. Danny Walsh, September 1976. It was a fall that should have ended a lot of things, but it gave him a life he never saw coming. Linda, Katie, 39 years of building things that mattered. Tomorrow I'm going to tell you about Bill Harrison in 1992, Minneapolis, and a night he tried to end his own life. That one's a little bit harder, but it's important. So I'll see you then.
That's it for this episode of Until They Wake. Unbound is free to listen to. If you'd like to support production costs or get in touch with Beth, check the show notes for details. See you next time.